Welcome to Not Everything Sucks with Andrew. Today, we're talking mental health and cooking with avocados, specifically avocado quiches. Very excited about this.
Yeah.
We have a special guest with us. But before we get rolling, we are going to be talking about some very important and sometimes very sensitive issues that include, but definitely aren't limited to, suicide. So, if you or someone you know are having thoughts or have had thoughts of suicide, please don't be afraid to seek help, especially if you are currently thinking. Please reach out to the National Service Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255.
Yes.
Melina, hi.
Hi.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. First, extremely grateful that you're hanging out with us on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I was super excited to come today. So I am currently a master's student at UT Austin. I'm studying social work, but I know you, right, through UTSA.
I just met her like yesterday.
Yeah, we just happened to. So I went to UTSA for my undergrad. I studied psychology there, got my degree in psychology, did a lot of work with a nonprofit organization that has chapters across the country called activeminds. I started a chapter at UTSA, and so the primary purpose of that is to raise mental health awareness and do suicide prevention initiatives on college campuses. So that was my life for a good number of years at UTSA. I loved it.
Sure.
Now I'm at UT Austin, kind of studying social work to continue that suicide prevention and mental health promotion work in the future.
Tell us a little bit about what activeminds is.
Yeah, so activeminds is a student-run, student-led student organization, right? And so it is mostly on college campuses. There are a couple of chapters across the country at high schools, but there are over 400 chapters total across the U.S. And really its purpose is to destigmatize mental health, right? So to make it something that students feel like they're able to talk about. And the reason why the college student population was targeted for this organization was because most mental health conditions kind of manifest or show up right around the time that we are in college, most students, right? So 18 to 24, that age range. And so this is like a really prime time for students to learn about mental health. It's definitely not something that we learn about in public school, right? In grade school, it's not a topic that we cover. And so learning about what mental health is, what mental wellness is, also learning about signs of mental illness and where to go to seek help, and then also about suicide, right? So learning about the signs for suicide and where to seek help for that. So that's really the goal of activeminds, is to make that conversation okay and to normalize it and let people know that there's support. Yeah.
Today, we are cooking with avocados, making avocado mini-quiches. Super excited. Have you ever cut an avocado before?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're going to do with this avocado is we're going to cut it, and I'll let you do the honors.
Okay.
We want it to be as finely diced as possible. So however you want to see that being done, you can take a half, I can take a half, and we'll roll with it.
All right.
Some of the ingredients that we have going into this are salt, pepper, green bell peppers, a cup of spinach, cheese, 3 egg whites, 3 complete eggs, and quinoa. Do we know what quinoa is? I don't know what quinoa is.
We said it's like similar to rice and that it's a grain and...
It's like hipster rice.
Yeah, it's like hipster rice.
It's hipster rice.
And it's good for you.
Hipster rice.
It's good for you.
It's great.
Yeah.
What I did with the quinoa is I boiled 1 cup of the quinoa into 2 cups of water until this stuff absorbs the water. It's ridiculous. It's like doing things I never expected it to do.
Yeah.
And it got all super fluffy.
Oops.
And bye to you. The seed
we got it out.
Flew completely on the other side of the kitchen. That's not the first time that's happened.
Okay, I'm glad. I was like, whoops.
And so it creates this oatmeal type consistency with the quinoa. We're gonna mix all of these things together, put them into a cupcake dish, bake them at 350 for about 20 minutes. While we're dicing our avocados and mixing these things all together, Melina, can you talk a little bit about what mental health is?
Yeah, so the way that I kind of conceptualize mental health is three-pronged, right? So our mental health is comprised of love, work, and our sense of self.
Okay.
Right? So by love, I mean our relationships, right? Humans are social creatures, and we're wired to connect with each other.
Okay.
And the quality of our relationships is really a huge component of our overall mental health, right? If we have that connection with friends and family, that's really good for us. By work, I don't necessarily mean like conventional 9-to-5 stuff, right? Like it's basically whatever you do on a day-to-day basis. If you can find meaning and fulfillment out of that, that's a huge contributor to your mental health. And then finally, the sense of self bit.
Okay.
And so that kind of entails self-esteem, right? Having a sense of identity, knowing who you are, and also having coping strategies in place to help you just get through like day-to-day stressors.
What are coping strategies?
Coping strategies are basically anything that you do to kind of facilitate your ability to get through hard stuff, right? So like stressors that might be from work or from family. What do you do to kind of relax?
Okay.
Right? How do you talk yourself through it? How do you just navigate through a difficult time? And so for some people, it might be like, oh, I will call my mom after a really long day, or it might be I'll go to the gym, or it might be I will sit and problem solve and make a list of pros and cons, or whatever that looks like. So there are various coping strategies that people probably already have without calling them coping strategies.
You talked briefly about mental health stigmas.
Yeah.
I'd like you to explain, perhaps a lot of us have mental health stigmas, unconscious biases, things we're not aware of. If you help explain what they are, maybe we can identify them and not deploy them into how we interact with the world. Before you do that, can you hand me the whisk?
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. So
mental health stigmas, right, are basically these misconceptions or preconceived notions about, we're dumping this in?
Yeah.
Dump it in. These notions about what mental health and mental illness mean, right, for a person. And so some common ones, one of them kind of stems from the fact that mental health is not as visible, right, as physical health.
Sure.
So if someone has a broken arm, like we clearly see your arm is broken and you are probably going to be impaired, and everyone will accept that, right? That's okay if you cannot write with your hand, for instance, right? But whenever we talk about mental health, right, or having a mental illness or a mental health issue, that's not as visible. It's more abstract, and we don't really have the language to say like, oh, I am feeling depressed, and, you know, have other people really understand what that means. And so for that reason, I would say that for some people, if mental health cannot be seen, then for them it's not like real.
Sure.
You know? So that's one stigma that really just
gets us.
Yeah, it gets us and gives a bad name to mental health. Another one would be, you know, thinking, are we getting this all over here?
We're putting it all in there.
Nice. So another stigma around mental health is that mental illness is that it's like a character flaw, right? So like if you have a mental health condition, there's something inherently wrong with you. Like it's about you. You did something wrong, or you can't cope, right? We talked a little bit about coping mechanisms. You can't cope with daily stressors, and it's about you. But in reality, right, you know, mental health and mental illness, it's not just in our heads, right? There's a biological basis, and it's also affected by social factors, environmental factors. But the main point is that there's a biological basis. And the same way that you wouldn't tell someone with like diabetes to just, you know, get control over your insulin, right? You don't tell someone that. And that's, you know, whenever we apply that logic to mental illness, it makes a little bit more sense as to why some people can't just snap out of depression or snap out of PTSD. It's just not a fair statement to make. So, and then the last stigma that is really prevalent today in our society is that people with mental illness are violent or scary or unpredictable.
Sure.
And, so those are just a couple, right? And obviously there misconceptions, right? Those are not true things. There's plenty of research to contradict each of those.
Yeah.
So it's important that we realize that and we not perpetuate those stigmas in our interactions with people.
It's quinoa time.
Quinoa time. All right. Let's see what happens.
So if you wouldn't mind
Yeah.
dumping the quinoa into our concoction, which
All right.
we've mixed everything kind of together.
We fluffed the quinoa and now it's time to...
We're fluffing the quinoa
Yeah.
because we don't want it to be unfluffed.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. I'm really excited about this recipe. One,
Yeah.
because it's going to be delicious, and two, because it was submitted to us by a good friend and,
cool.
and someone who enjoys the podcast. And so I'm excited about taking on this challenge.
Yeah. My hands are a little slippery, so I don't want the bowl to break.
Gosh,
but
yeah, I'll give you some support.
Thank you.
So a lot of us, as we're dumping the quinoa in, a lot of us have jobs. A lot of us go to school, but for those of us who have, somewhat normalish jobs where we have managers, etc.
Yeah.
We can say, like I did this Monday, I have a cold and I have a fever, which I did this Monday.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Manager, sir, what's good? I don't feel well if I go to work. Not only will I not do well, but I'll probably make other people not feel well too.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a day. And that conversation happens time and time again. That same conversation could potentially happen with someone who's having the equivalent of a cold, but for mental health.
Yeah.
How does someone have that conversation? What do they do with their manager to say, I feel XYZ, I need a day?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so I will say that, the jobs that I've had thus far are in the mental health field, right? So my managers have been super understanding and they totally get mental health and mental illness, and it's a valid experience for them. So whenever I say I need a mental health day, there's really no questions asked. But I know that that's not the reality for a lot of people. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that it will be a difficult conversation, and it's brave of us to approach it in the first place.
Sure.
And I think just explaining to the best of your ability, the first part of what you said is that, if you're calling in about a flu, right? Like, I'm not going to be productive. Like, I really do not feel well.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
You're not going to be, gold.
Yeah.
Go. Please continue.
And that's really what it boils down to. It's, to me, I feel comfortable saying that, like, I'm not going to be productive. I don't feel well, right? But I also recognize, like I just mentioned, that I've been working in the mental health field. Like, this is my thing. And so, again, just really underscoring the bravery that it takes to say that in another field. But we also have to recognize that, like our generation, right, millennials, we kind of understand, mental health, and it's becoming a more accepted and understood concept. But maybe our supervisors and managers are from a different generation that don't understand mental health in the same way, right? And so that might call for a larger cultural paradigm shift in the way that we understand mental health. And so we may have to be patient with that. But yeah, there's also the concept of like personal time off, right? And days that aren't necessarily labeled as mental health days, but you might be able to take advantage of those whenever you do need a mental health day.
We're gonna grab those
the tin
of cupcake. It's a cupcake pan.
Nice.
You put cupcake little cups in there.
Let's
if we want to
move this,
move this out of the way. We're just making a mess today. I love it. And then we're gonna grab that spray.
Yeah.
If you like to spray the papers themselves.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I know, isn't that crazy?
A concept.
Ooh, I know. Learning new things.
Yeah.
Literally every week.
Oh wow. This is
You feel the power of
the
spray.
I thought it was gonna be misty, and this is like yeah.
It's like we have liftoff.
Yeah.
There we go.
But hey, they for sure will not stick.
Melina, look at the consistency of this. This is crazy.
That looks pretty good though.
I thought it was gonna be more of a pouring kind of thing, but it looks more of a like Rice Krispie kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Quinoa crispy.
Okay. So I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Someone else asked a question on social media in promoting this podcast. They asked, what do we do for veterans' mental health, college students' mental health? What access, what services are provided to them? If you could let us know that while I start dumping these into the cupcakes.
Yeah, so in terms of veteran mental health, especially in a city like San Antonio, right, where it's deemed Military City USA,
Sure.
there are a lot of resources available for veterans, right? So like the VA, for instance, is one place you can go to kind of navigate your mental health options, right, if that's what you're seeking. I saw in one of the comments asking about student veterans, right? So
Sure.
college students who are veterans and who are looking for services. So I will say, like, for instance, at UTSA, I checked their website and there's a specific page for student veterans and who are looking for mental health support. And so the cool thing about UTSA and a number of colleges and universities is that oftentimes the counseling services are free of charge, right? Which basically means we already paid for them in our tuition fees, so you should use them. And so you can get individual therapy if that's what you're seeking. You can join a peer support group where you're with other student veterans and you can talk about various issues, right? And then, of course, there's usually like veterans offices on campuses that kind of help serve as a liaison between other student services and the student veteran. Sure. But yeah, the common issues for veterans are PTSD. Obviously, that's disproportionately affects veterans. But also there are other mental health conditions that are not at the level of a mental illness, but things like transitioning back into civilian life. Any transition in life can be difficult, and there's nothing wrong with seeking support whenever you're kind of taking on the role now of being a student and being back in civilian life and what that might look like for you. So yeah.
We're ready to put these guys in the oven.
They look great.
Look at this.
I'm excited.
Oh
That looks awesome.
You look so weird. Oh my
They're kind of cute though.
They're cute.
They're cute.
They're like me. Weird, cute. I'm not cute. Let's not fool myself. These are gonna go in for 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, unfortunately, they're not gonna be ready to go
No
by
problem.
the end of this, but we'll post pictures.
Yeah. Can I bother you for a napkin, actually?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm hoarding all the napkins.
Thank you. Avocados in my nails.
Melina,
Yeah.
can we buckle up for a second?
Yeah.
Let's buckle up.
Yeah.
Mass shootings. There is a lot of correlation with people's discussions of mass shootings and mental illness. Are mass shootings more of a gun control issue, or are they more of a mental health, mental illness issue?
That's a great question, and super relevant to what's going on today. It's definitely a very sobering issue as well. So, to put it simply, I will say that it's a little bit of both, right? There are people from the gun control sector who say, like, this is a gun control issue, or this has nothing to do with mental health. And I would say, like, that's not totally accurate, but then also on the other side, people that are saying it's totally only a mental health issue.
Sure.
It's not about guns. Like, that's also inaccurate, right? So what we know from research about mass shootings or acts of mass violence and mental illness is that in general, right, people with mental illness are more likely to be the victims of violence rather than the perpetrators, right? Okay. So then whenever we think about mass shootings, right, in the media, we're looking to pin down, like, why this happened, right? Like, that's the question, is why.
Rationalize it.
Yeah, which makes total sense, right? But I will say that I think that the media unfairly, right, always correlates the two, like mental health and mass shootings. Like, it's always necessarily those two, and it's because of mental health issues that this shooting happened, right? And so something that we say in, like, research, right, is that correlation is not causality, right? So there might be a host of other factors aside from the person's mental health that led to a mass shooting or an act of mass violence, but it's unfair to just blame it on mental health and say, like, that's what it is. So yeah, that's...
I think a lot of people, especially people who believe that they're in their right mind, right? They're normal people in their right mind, whatever that means, would like to say that these people who commit these acts of violence are not in their right mind, as a way to almost say, that could never be me. I could never do that because I am in my right mind and they are not. It almost monsterizes
Yeah.
them, right? It's this, they are them, we are us.
Yeah.
Are people who commit mass violent crimes in their right mind?
So there's research to suggest of those particular situations, right? Of those people who commit acts of mass violence, like, yeah, there is some connection for them
Sure.
with mental illness, mental health, right? So I'm not going to say that there's absolutely no correlation and that, you know, it's not the case, because sometimes it genuinely is, right? Sometimes people really are not in their right minds. But I think what we tend to do is then take that and then like generalize it to say, oh, because of this segment of the population that has committed an act of mass violence, because they have a mental illness, it's safe to say that people with mental illness in general are violent and that they are more likely to commit acts of mass violence, when that's really not true. I think the American Psychiatric Association in 2016 released a report that said people with serious mental illness are implicated in like 1% of gun-related homicides. So just keeping that in mind, right? The risk for suicide and self-harm is much higher in people with mental illness than acts of mass violence.
We're going to go a little deeper into even more sensitive issues.
Yeah.
Your research has to do with suicidality. What are some overarching points that you wish people knew about either people going through a suicidal thought process or preventing that from even happening?
Yeah. So I think a good starting point is to say that suicidal thoughts, right, are way more common. They occur way more commonly than we think. So I studied suicide in the college student population, and so amongst college students, 20% of college students have thought about suicide at some point in time, right? So it's important for us to kind of make that okay to say, right, to seek help for. Like, it's not something that's totally, you know, you're not the only person in the world that's ever experienced this, right? So first and foremost, I want to say that. Some misconceptions around suicide and like preventing suicide. So first and foremost, I think like the risk factors and what those look like can be misunderstood. But one thing that is great to ask whenever you have any reason to suspect someone might be suicidal, people think that asking the question, are you thinking of suicide, is going to somehow implant this idea in the mind of the person they're asking, right? And it's going to make them more likely to do that. But research says that that's not the case, right? Like, that does not happen. If they've already thought about suicide, they've already thought about it. And the worst they can tell you is no, right? They're no, I haven't. Maybe they'll be offended, right? But that's better than not asking and then later on finding out that they've taken their lives, right? Like, that's, I'd rather be offended, or I'd rather have someone be offended in response to my question than have them, you know, die by suicide and me thinking I should have just asked. Maybe I could have helped them get support. Yeah. So, it's a scary topic, right? Like, I'm not going to lie. Even for me, someone that has had personal experience with suicide, someone that has studied it and does suicide prevention efforts, like, it's still scary to think about, and it's still scary to ask that question in the moment. But another thing I want to say is that there are a lot of resources available, right? And again, realizing that you're not the only one. There are other people who have gone through this, who are going through this, that get support. And that's like the key thing, is that there is hope and there is help available. And so it's a matter of, you know, navigating your resources, reaching out to your support network, and receiving the support that you need, because you absolutely deserve it, right? And there are ways to manage this and to overcome this.
Let's elevate up a couple levels and talk about seeking support and help. So I am normal person Andrew Hubbard. I'm a relatively happy person. I do relatively happy things like cook with avocados and go to work and, you know, try to get better from colds and the flu and all that stuff. If someone were to come to me and say, I'm not exactly sure how to put my finger on it, but I think there might be something going on in my head that I'm not sure what it is, some mental health issue, some mental illness issue, what do I do? What do I say? How do I react to that person?
Yeah. So a great first step is just to listen, right? And that sounds like duh, right? But there are so many times, and it's even happened to me, where I kind of confide in someone like, hey, I'm not feeling well. This is, a mental issue that I think I'm dealing with. Yeah. And they're like, oh, no. Like, they're almost so afraid of it being true that they're, oh, no. Like, I'm going to dismiss that, right? Like, that's totally not the case. Everyone goes through that. It's really not that big of a deal, right? And so in that moment, you've like totally invalidated the other person, and you've broken that connection, that level of trust. Like, they're trying to confide in someone that's like their first step in getting help, right? Is vocalizing it, and you've shut them down. Yeah. So that's what not to do, right? So what you can do is listen, right? You listen non-judgmentally. You're not there to tell them what they're feeling or thinking is wrong, because you're not them, right? You don't know. Yeah. But you try to validate as best you can, right? And so that might sound like, wow, that sounds really difficult. This must be very hard for you. I can't imagine what that feels like. So those are just like 3 basic things that you can say. And the person will continue to talk, right? As long as you don't, stop their flow conversation or their thought process by telling them, no, that's not the case. Yeah. They'll keep talking to you, and they'll keep opening up. And then I think from there, after you've listened and validated that experience, I think a logical next step is to say, okay, well, you're not alone, right? Like, I am here with you, and together we can figure out what the next steps might be. So maybe that's calling another friend or a parent, right, to let them know what's going on. Or maybe that's looking into resources in the community. So maybe they're at a university, you can look into the counseling center there. Maybe you are at a workplace, and there's the like employee assistance program that might be able to offer you some mental health support. Or maybe it's looking at, for instance, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, is a national organization for those that advocates for those with mental illness. And so there are local chapters across the country that have compiled a resource guide, right? So for instance, there's one in San Antonio, and it's pages and pages long of all the mental health resources that are available. Whether you're looking for individual support, group support, if you're looking for someone that takes your insurance, whether you're uninsured, right? Like, you can figure out what your next steps will be. So just being there for that other person during that difficult time, right? And not shaming them, not judging them, not telling them that they're crazy for thinking the way that they are. Just listening to them and helping them through that is so crucial in that really sensitive moment.
I think from what you've said, if you are the person who is going through that, you could almost say, allow yourself to be validated in who you are. I would think that being able to trust friends you can trust, or trust family, mentors, etc. you can trust. Yeah. There's a lot of things in this conversation that suck. Yeah. We're called we're not called Everything Sucks. We're called Not Everything Sucks. Melina, what doesn't suck?
About mental illness, mental health.
And mental health, yeah.
So there's a growing movement, right, to promote mental wellness and mental health, right? So it's not just about being mentally ill, you are or you're not, right? Like, that's not what it is anymore. We're really operating under the premise that everyone has mental health, the same way that everyone has physical health, and it's worth investing in and taking care of, right? So even if you don't have a mental illness, you still, those, going back to those 3 elements of what mental health is, love, work, and self, you still have those components that you do have to intentionally nurture and tend to. And so, there's this growing movement of millennials and others who are kind of changing the way that our society thinks about mental health, and that's really promising, right? There's organizations like Active Minds, right, that are spreading the message and normalizing conversations and letting people know it's okay to talk about it and it's okay to seek help. Sure. There are movements, at the political level to improve our mental health care system, right? Like, that's huge. Yes. Because it's one thing to raise awareness and say, hey, there's resources available, and it's another thing to make sure those resources are available. Sure. Right? So yeah, those are 2 just kind of big picture things that don't suck. But other things too are just seeing the way that people practice self-care, right? And so the way that people take care of themselves and nurture those 3 areas of mental health. And so for a lot of people, like for instance, my mom, right? Her idea of self-care is like working out twice a day, right? And so I just want to say that we practice self-care a lot of times not even knowing that we're practicing self-care. So for her, it's a restorative thing to work out twice a day. Like she feels better, it kind of clears her mind, it increases her ability to cope with things, and that's amazing, right? Like on a small micro level, it's like, that's awesome, Mom, right?
Yes.
For me, that's not how I practice self-care, right? I don't work out 2 times a day. But it's awesome to see, my friends and my family members doing that and seeing how everyone practices self-care differently. And that's a big message that I want to give out today, too, is that it's important for us to incorporate self-care every day. Again, even if you don't call it that, even if it's like, no, I just go to the gym, or no, I just call my mom every day, or no, it's really just me going to church. Whatever it looks like for you, whatever it is that gives you that sense of meaning, fulfillment, restoration, helps you de-stress, like do it and keep doing it, because that's really what keeps us balanced and healthy.
Melina, thank you so much for coming and educating us, encouraging us. Your time is completely invaluable, and we're grateful to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
If you are having any thoughts of suicide, or you know someone who has, there's a couple of resources for you. The first is the National Service Prevention Lifeline. That's 1-800-273-8255. There's a way that you can use your phone to text in the same fashion. You text HOME to 741-741 to reach the Crises Textline. If we learned anything, we learned that we are valid. Our thoughts are valid. And help might just be a phone call, a conversation, or a text away.
Yeah.
Not everything sucks. Not everything sucks. And we're glad we got to talk a little bit about why. We'll see you next week.